So Jean, I want to tell you about something that happened to me today, and you can tell me what you think. But I was kind of like, what? So I got my hair cut today for the first time since before Omicron. I've just, for whatever reason, I haven't gotten my hair cut since in like 5 months. It was getting to be just horrible. Even my mom was like, I think you need a haircut. And so I was starting to feel like at that point anyway. So I'm sitting there and I just moved to a new city. I moved from New York City to Washington, D.C. just like a few months ago.
Is that
So
why
I
you
didn't know
haven't
where
been
to get my
around?
hair cut, but I went down the street to this person right down the street. And I'm sitting there, and of course well, I went really early, and she was super nice. She opened up really early for me because I was like, I don't really have time to get my hair. That's probably why I don't get my hair cut. I don't really have time to do things. I need to make more time for things like that. But anyways, so she opened up for me early, and so we're sitting there, and it's just the two of us there, and I'm meeting this woman for the first time because I've never met her. And you're not going to believe what the conversation was. Today was a good day. She said, my dad recently had a stroke. And in December, she goes, my dad just had a stroke, but I actually spoke with him today and he sounded really good. And for the first time, I was thinking, wow, he's like going in a really good direction. So I was like, wow, this is a heavy conversation for 8 o'clock in the morning. And she said, but you know what? I really need to start thinking about getting him prepared and getting my family prepared for, well, what if, things get worse? And she started going into this whole conversation, and I said, she said, what are your thoughts? And I said, well, actually, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic.
Did she not
Actually,
know you
no,
like
she
this is
she didn't
in
know anything. She didn't know anything about me. And so she starts talking about getting prepared and she was just sort of talking out loud, like maybe I should think about having some heavy conversations with my father. And actually, he's in Portugal right now, which is where he's living. And I said, well, I happen to know a little bit about this topic. I actually started a whole business around this topic 10 years ago. And I actually wrote a book on this topic too. And she was like, really? What? And I was like, I know, it's super weird that you're talking to me about this. And so she starts going into the story in more detail. And apparently, she has two siblings, she has two siblings. She's the youngest. And her feeling on it is that she really needs to help her dad start to think about what's going to happen. How does he want to be cared for? Who should be taking care of him? She is trying to figure out if she should set up home care for him. But the thing is that her two siblings don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have anything to do with this conversation. And they're older. And she said, and she's the youngest sibling. And so she gets overruled by them all the time. So I was like, well, what does your dad want? How does he want this all to go? Because I guess the big question was, should he move from Portugal? She wants to get him to move to DC, but the siblings who are all here in DC don't want the dad here.
So here's the question, because I think this comes down to let's deal with the first part. Does she like her siblings, or are they jerks? Or are the siblings angry for some reason other than not just wanting the burden? Or was the dad a horrible person? Did you ask those questions, or is that just what I'd ask if I met?
So you're not going to you're actually not going to believe where the conversation went. This is why I wrote you this morning and said, yes. I think I know what we need to talk about. So she asked me. She said, "Do you have any siblings?" And I said, "Yes, I do have siblings." Which is kind of always, now it's like an awkward conversation or an awkward answer. I'm always trying to figure out, how do I answer this question? So I said, well, I have two sisters, and I actually had a brother who was killed in a car accident. And she said, my brother was killed in a car accident. And I said, what? And she said, yes, he was killed by a drunk driver. And I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but my brother was killed by an impaired driver. So she then says her brother was killed by a drunk driver in New York. And she tells me the story, and it's this terrible story. Her brother, I think was, first of all, she's telling me all of this wearing a mask. I'm wearing a mask and she's blow drying my hair. So this was like a really intense conversation to have with a stranger,
Gotcha.
but I was captivated by her to be depressing. And
It's not.
also, so I felt so connected to her that I went home, Gene, I got a copy of the book. I, I, and it was one of our signed copies, and I brought it back to her. And I said, I hope this helps you, because she was like, I really do need to think about getting a will, don't I? And I was like, well, you own this business. It was her, it's
Yeah.
her place. And I said, well, what would you do if something happens to you? What would happen to your business? Like, forget everything else.
Yeah.
Like, what would happen here? And you could see the light bulb just went off in her head, and she was kind of quiet for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And and then she said, you're right. I really haven't thought about what would happen to my business.
Hmm.
And she said, and the other thing is that I really need my parents to start having this conversation with me. They do not want to talk about it. They just
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it. They want to avoid it. And and I was like, well, so here's what you should consider doing. Talk to them about what you're thinking about doing with your business as just
Yep.
a way of starting the conversation. And she actually thought that was a good idea.
That's actually the thing that it's interesting how it started about the dad and the siblings. But the reality is, until she has an idea and wraps her head around it, she's not going to be able to help her family as much as she wants to, because she doesn't exactly know what to do. And but we see that over and over. It's so much easier for me to tell you what to do or someone else what to do than for me to do it myself. And people, that it's very, we see that a lot. Like a lot of times where we talked about people, I just want to get my parents organized and I want to do that. And the moment you kind of shine it on them, it's not about me. I don't need that. I'll deal with it later. And you're like, well, your parents feel the exact same way, and there's no one pressuring you to do it now. But how do you feel if someone came out and starts not so much accusing you, but being like, you have to do this, and they forget why you have to do it? Like, the dad had a stroke. He clearly might be having a difficult time. There could be really complicated family dynamics where it could seem like it's a burden, but maybe they don't talk. They don't get along. Maybe the dad isn't someone that's where they have to figure that out. But odds are it always falls on one kid. It's very rare. If you have 3 kids, if you have 2, it's rare that it's like evenly distributed, like a business. Okay, you're the CFO, you're the chief creative officer, you're going to make sure that the deeds get done. And we had someone write in with a similar issue this week to Everplans. And it was a family that was going through stuff, and do our parents go into, assisted care, and we're all overwhelmed, and where do we even start? And the advice that we give is you kind of need a quarterback, someone who's going to kind of put together the plan and then send each person out to do something and say, we need to get an elder law attorney and we need to get an estate attorney. And you're going to have to find that, and hit up your network, hit up that. We're going to have to find an organization like Home for Mom or caring.com to find caregiving and figure out what our options are. And then from there, figure out what's going to be covered through Medicare or Medicaid. They were talking about funeral plans. How do you get those organized? You have to find out from your parents what they want, or you have to be the person making the decision, so the siblings aren't fighting at that moment. And a lot of it is recognizing that these logistics will keep you busy, but they won't make you feel better. And I think a lot of people bury the busy work. They do the busy work. I'm so busy. I have to get everything settled, and I'm an executor, and I have to get a will done, and I have to talk to a lawyer. And in a way, it occupies their mind so they don't have to deal with the grief and the possibility that their parent's not going to be there anymore. So the busier you stay, and at some point you're going to crash. And ideally, you want to spend some time now still being with your parents and not just talking about this stuff and not making it one demand after another and one task after another, but like talk to them.
Nobody wants to have these conversations, and they shouldn't take up all the time that you have with your family, but they're good conversations to have. It was weird that this happened to me this morning, because I literally woke up this morning already thinking about this topic, because I went out to dinner last night with my parents, and my dad's 86 and my mom is 75. My knock on wood, they are in good health, and I'm so lucky. But this interesting thing is starting to happen with all of their friends. All of their friends are downsizing. They're going from their homes to apartments. And I'm having this conversation. I said, wow, mom and dad, it's really interesting that all of your friends, like all of them, are selling their homes right now. They all randomly happen to be moving into the same apartment building, which is kind of funny. And I guess there's like one giant apartment building in DC that everyone goes to. And so I said, but you're not doing that right now. And my mom was like, yeah, we're sort of playing with fire. And I was sort of like, actually, yeah, you kind of are. What are you going to do about, like, what are you thinking? And my mom goes, why can't we just hope for the best? And I was like, Mom, seriously? I was like, well, we can hope for the best, but we should plan for the worst. And I'm realizing as I'm talking, we're having this conversation that, and even despite the fact that I do this every single day and I talk about this every single day, and this is my, like what I've been doing for over a decade, even my family is not, we're just like not doing the things that we need to be doing. And we need to start, even though we've had some conversations, we actually need to make some moves so that the people who know that it's going to fall on them are probably the ones who at least have an inkling that we need to start thinking about this sooner rather than later, because they know when if something happens, it's going to pile on them like a mountain, and it's going to be overwhelming. And we know that from hearing stories that it becomes a full-time job to have to pick up the pieces or to have to deal with some of this stuff. It just is. It's complicated. I think there's no way around it. There's nothing, there's nothing that's really going to simplify it.
Yeah.
It's just about trying to take it sort of one step at a time. And so the earlier you start, the better it is. It's like, it's like saving money.
The thing I want people to also realize is that it's understandable that you don't know any of this stuff, because why would you? Why would anyone think about Medicare or Medicaid until you actually have to deal with it? Why would anyone think about probate court until you actually have to go to it? Like, it's stuff that you're blindsided by. And we say there's this whole world that's waiting for you. And it's understandable that it's a huge mess. So you're going to want as much, as many pieces and as much information as possible. So when you enter that world, you will learn. And this is the one area where people can reach out to others, because once someone goes through this, they're lost, they're confused, they're frustrated, they just don't know when it's going to end. But once they get through it, they now have this knowledge that they probably never have to use again. You only have so many parents, you only have so many people you're going to do this for. So that knowledge then becomes something they probably want to share with somebody. So the people that have written into us, we say, first, ask people They might have had to deal with elder law. They may have had to deal with probate. They may have had a good estate attorney. They might know how to talk to a funeral home, because they're like, I did this, and now it's just knowledge in my head that I feel is useless, and I want to help someone else so they don't go through what I'm going through. And that's where reaching out for help isn't a sign of weakness. It doesn't mean that you're dumb, because in all honesty, if we hadn't spent all this time learning about it, none of us would know any of this. It'll never be easy in that sense, and the paperwork will get done. It could take a long time.
But what I just realized?
Get ruined.
It's so sad. I mean, this is kind of sad, but when we think about hope for the best, in this particular situation, there actually is no best. There's no best. This is just, it's going to be a sucky situation, but it's not going to be good. There is no good. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's too dark, but it's not that. I mean, honestly,
our next book, Abby, everything sucks. Run. Don't.
I mean, I'm not an everything sucks kind of person. I'm not at all.
You're not. You're too positive for me all the time. I'm like,
but I do know what's going to happen, and I know that we can't hope for the best. We have to, even with hoping, you can hope for the best, but you've got to do some planning in order to make it the best. And so, and even in that case, it's not gonna be great, but it might be easier. And so I think we shouldn't be going for the best. I think we should be going for a better reality, a manageable reality.
Hope for the manageable, but also knowing that with a couple, it's interesting because when there's two parents, then there's two different divergent paths. Because you think one parent, like, okay, if you know, if you have to think about it that way, you're like, well, what happens if this one parent is gone? And this is a way someone can kind of game plan in their head. Okay, if this parent was gone, what would be affected? And if this parent was gone, what would be affected? Because there could be one that's very independent and very like takes care of everything. And there could be someone who's completely dependent. And you're like, this person would need someone to move in and take care of them. Whereas this person would kind of like, you know, be upset, but move on with their lives. And then you have to start planning from there and say, okay, then when it becomes one parent left, that's usually when it gets messy among the siblings and the rest of the family, because everything pretty much falls on the surviving spouse or the surviving partner. It's after that, the next level, that's where you start seeing it among families that can branch out and become bigger problems. So I think, like, for example, the hairstylist, the siblings are dealing with this now. I don't know if the mother is still alive. I don't know if it would fall on her. I don't know if the father's, we don't know the full, I don't know the full situation. You don't know it. But odds of him moving here, maybe it could simplify things and it could be the right move. But
Well, I mean, that's what was stressing me out, was thinking about, I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate that both of my parents are still
Mhm.
alive. I'm really lucky. My dad's 86. He plays tennis with me. He's
Yeah.
my doubles partner. Like, we play against my mom. You know, this is like, we are so grateful that
Yeah.
that is our situation. But, you know, who knows how long that will be our situation. And
Yeah.
we don't know, you know, my mom always jokes, even though she's 11 years younger, that, you know, my dad could outlive her. And the one conversation we have is like, who's dad going to start dating, you know, two
Yes.
weeks after my mom dies? And that's always a fun
He'll
conversation.
move
But
into that one house, that clearly that weird house that everyone's moving into. Obviously, it's like a party house where it's
it's not a house. It's like a giant apartment complex here. Beautiful. But it is I think what you're saying is right, which is, I shouldn't be thinking only about what happens if neither of my parents are here anymore,
yeah,
but what happens if one of them isn't, and
yeah.
what's going to happen in that situation. And I don't think that we have solved for that yet. It's something that we're actively trying to think through. And so I'm going through it along with them. And it's not easy. It's not fun. It's not it's not a good conversation to have, but actually when we do start having the conversation, it makes me
Mhm.
feel so much better.
Yeah,
And I think it does make them feel better too.
and I'd love to. The thing that's interesting is the family dynamics and the conversations are always a huge issue. And I think when it comes to siblings, it really, like, there's people, I wonder if someone's like an only child, if they feel like, wow, this is all falling on me and I'm just going to run and hide, or they have a feeling that, well, there's just me. But I think that you don't want to talk about this stuff. People don't want to see their parents, especially even as their parents are aging. No one wants to kind of admit it. They want to remember their parents 20 years ago. Have you ever, like, have you broached it at all with your family?
Yeah, I have broached it.
Mhm.
I have broached it. I mean, we've talked about this in a few ways, but I mean, the first conversation we had, which was um, years ago, was when my dad kind of jokingly said that when he dies, he wants the
Oh yeah,
most expensive, he wants the most expensive casket we could buy,
the Rolls Royce of
the
caskets.
Rolls Royce. And we were like, what, why would you want to spend like a lot of money on a casket? And he was like, that's just what I want. And in my family, my dad's like the king. So we were like, okay, you know, that's what dad wants. Start saving now for his mahogany, velvet
50,000.
lined, you know, P. Diddy casket. So we started the conversation that way. And then it, many years later, this came up about 6 months ago. We were at a funeral and there was a casket. And I said to my dad, is that still the kind, you know, what kind of casket do you still want? And he said, well, I had wanted the most expensive one, but maybe I don't care anymore. And I was like, well, you need to tell us that, because if you've changed your mind and now you want the plain pine
Mhm.
box, which is the cheapest option, then you need to tell us, because otherwise we would have gone to, there might have been like a war in the room
Yeah.
where somebody was like, what casket does dad really want? So that kind of, I don't want to say it was a joke, but it was kind of a we kind of turned it into a funny conversation, but then it allowed me to start asking him other things about what he might want, or where are all of his things. And
Yeah.
that was really how it all started, was that conversation. But then it led to, Dad, let's get real for a second. If something were to happen to you, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Because I didn't know the answer. And he said, well, if something were to happen to me, but by the way, that was how I started the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I really started it by saying, I just want to talk about something. If something were to happen to you, what do I do? So
Yeah.
it wasn't about what plans have you made, or,
Yeah.
uh, tell me what's in your will, or, it wasn't about that. It was more like, what do I do? Who do I call? What do I do? Tell me what's the first thing that I should do? And so he said, well, come here. And I happened to be at his house at the time. And he said, come sit in my office. He said, if something were to happen to me, then you need to I have an if I die file. I was like, okay, where is it? He said, it's on my desktop on my computer. I said, okay, does your computer have a password? And he said, yes. I said, well, what's the password? And he said, oh, well, it's written on a sticky note inside my desk drawer. So I said, okay, so show me. So we opened the desk drawer. It's not there. He goes, oh, actually, the sticky note is not in my desk drawer anymore. I moved it. It's a sticky note that's hidden underneath my desk, on the, like above the, So I go under his desk and I look up, and yeah, there is a sticky note there. I'm like, great, okay. So we put in that password. Password does not work. I'm like, Dad, okay, so now I don't have a way to get into your computer. He was like, you're right. Okay, he's like, I screwed up, so I need to update my sticky note. I was like, okay, we'll come back to that in a second. I did get him onto a password manager. So we get into his computer, and there is an if I die file there. And slowly but surely, he started putting all of that information. He's probably Everplan's most super user. It's like he's everything now in an Everplan.
With my dad.
Yes, with your
Both
dad. And he loves it, and he uses it all the time. And I get notifications that he's updating his plan all the time. But then that really was the starting off point for us to start talking through the different things and say, Dad, do you have a lawyer? Who would I contact if I needed to? Or do you have an accountant? Who is that person? And so that was really the way that we started, was just like, what do I do if something happens to you?
Yeah, I mean, the password thing was how I started. But I've always talked, like, it never really, but my family is like, when it comes to that stuff, I was always willing to bring it up. As long as we were talking about theoreticals in the future, it was a lot easier than talking about things in the past. It wasn't like dwelling on things or like for me, I don't, and I think there's people that we talk about, like they should be, someone that's no longer around, you shouldn't act like they never existed. That's where I think some families get hung up, because if you mention someone, they're like, no, don't even say that. And I'm like, no, they were alive. They affected my life. If I want to bring them up every single day, every conversation, I should be able to. Like, I like talking about my mom. I like remembering her. I don't look at it as a sad thing. And some people, they do, where if you even mention it, they're like, oh God, I'm going to run out of the room crying. And I'm like, get over yourself. Like maybe remembering people, like that's the whole point. If you don't remember them, then that's how you kind of keep them alive. And for my dad, I remember the password manager was a huge thing because he didn't have a solution. He's like, I write them down. It's a pain. I forget them. And once he used it, he's like, wow, this is amazing. And because of that, I realized, okay, that has the contacts. That started him to start saying, okay, well, this is an attorney you'd contact. This is a funeral home. Because a lot of times families, they have plots that their grandparents bought. And now it's passed down. And they're like, this is who you'd call. This is how they'd arrange it. And believe me, when you call them, they're going to take care of everything. Don't worry. Like, they're not going to ask you many questions. They know this. They've been doing this for the last 100 years. They're totally on top of it. My person knows exactly who's named as beneficiaries on accounts. So they're going to make sure it gets to the right person. So in a sense, once you get that out of the way, you're like, you know what? I think I've got enough to deal with at that point. But the interesting thing is, a lot of times people over the years think it works one way, and then they find out afterwards it works totally different. Like, that's where probate court, or the fact in some states you need to hire an estate attorney. You can't do it by yourself. So no matter what, you're putting out thousands of dollars to do things that might not even be worth it, but you have no other choice unless the estate is below a certain value, in which case you could do it on your own. But a lot of times you don't know until you're dealing with it. But I
I
think
think
starting
I
it
was
from a
going to say,
practical standpoint is better than an emotional one.
and you bring up a good point about the, you once you've done some of this work, and
Hmm.
if you've, I mean, what you just described is somebody who's very well planned. They've got lots of
Yes.
people in their life who are able to handle things for them, which is great. A lot of people don't have
Yes.
anybody who's helping them, and so that's a different scenario, and we can certainly talk about that too. But if you have done, if you are somebody who has an attorney or
Hmm.
has an estate attorney or has an accountant, make sure that, right, you should make sure that
Yeah.
somebody else in your life knows who that person is. Because I I remember when we were first starting here, and my dad said, I don't need to talk
Yeah.
about getting everything organized. I'm organized. Everything's with my estate attorney. And my mom said, but wait, Milton, who's our
Yeah.
estate attorney? And that, I mean,
It's
that
true.
that's I think that's a common
Yeah.
scenario. People
It is.
have done planning, but if they haven't told other people who they've done it with or what the plans are, even at a high level, it's sort of like you never did anything at all. It was stressful when my dad and I were doing it, even at that moment in
Hmm.
time, trying to get in and figure out what the issue was. And but then I was like, Dad, I do not want to be having to go through this. If something has just happened to you, my
Yeah.
brain is going to be out of whack. I'm not going to be thinking straight. I'm not going to
Yeah.
be able to, I don't want to take an extra 45 minutes at that moment and try to, figure out how to get into the if I die file.
Yeah.
So I think it's right. It's like just trying to think a little bit about those kinds
And
of gotchas.
And Angela, you asked about like ways to start the conversation, and Abby mentioned this earlier in a way, which is make it about yourself. I'm thinking about life insurance. Is it worthwhile? I heard long-term care insurance has gotten really expensive. Do you have? And then you find out if they say, I don't believe in that. You're like, cool. I know that's not a factor. You're almost checking things off, like, and that way at least you know what to expect. Because if someone asks you later, oh, did Dad do a will? No, he didn't believe in them. He thought that they were there. It's up to us to figure it out, which is going to be great. But then ideally, if you know the answer, but make it about yourself. I have a will. Where should I keep it? I was doing one. Should I create a trust? Have you created one? Could you explain how it works? How is this owned? I'm worried. I have my first mortgage. Could you? Because they love imparting. Parents love imparting knowledge, especially something that they've experienced. So if you use it that way, you're getting information, but also, that could be useful for your own life, but you're also getting information about them. And you're going to find out that they could say, I had life insurance, a 30-year plan. It was term when you guys were young. Once you guys were old and out of the house and I didn't have to pay anything, what's the point? Whereas someone will say, yeah, I got it when I was really young. It was cheap. I have it for the rest of my life and I have it through this company. And right there, you're uncovering things and you remember that. Like, again, you don't have to have secret recordings and like little notepads, but it's good to maybe think of that. A lot of us feel like we should know this stuff. If you're in your 50s or 60s and you don't understand how probate works or how a will works or anything, you feel like, I'd sooner say it's stupid and never do it than admit I don't understand it. And we always say, I don't care. The same way I hate when younger people make fun of older people because they can't use a phone perfectly or they don't understand a computer as well. I'm like, they didn't grow up with this. The majority of their lives was spent with a phone placed in their home, and when you weren't around, you did not talk. People can't fathom that. So it's not as fast. It's not as integrated into their lives. So rather than make fun of them, maybe like help them and realize they might be embarrassed. I've known a lot of people that were older that were genuinely embarrassed about that they didn't know how to send an email because when they worked, there wasn't email. Everything was written by hand or everything was done over the phone. And those types of people feel like they do get relegated to the outskirts and they feel ashamed. And I feel like, no, once you enter them in and once you show them that use this technology for the good, we're not excluding you, we're actually helping you, then maybe they'll open up and say, you know what, I just don't understand how a will works. I don't understand how trust works. And that's the thing,
Yeah.
Abby, that you do a lot, which is great. If you don't understand something, you're not going to pretend that you do. You're going to say, I don't get it. And if someone explains it and you still don't get it, you're going to say, I still don't get it. Help me, show me. And then that way, you won't be making your parents feel bad, because a lot of times it's like, oh, the parents always told the kids what to do. Once the kids get that shot, they use it almost as like they're almost happy to be able to lord over their parents with knowledge that they don't have. And I'm like, give them a break. You know, there's certain things, it's just, and as you have these beliefs for so long, they get harder and harder to break. So really be open and honest about it, and just say, like, do you not understand that? You know, it's something that maybe they're going to realize, wow, my image of a healthcare proxy, I literally thought a living will meant that you can kill me. I didn't realize it only works in these specific circumstances. If there's no chance of recovery, if doctors say this, they will not just take me off life support because I'm taking up too much space. Like, once you understand that and you get past the myths and all the things you thought, and you realize what it actually does, then maybe you're going to say, you know what? Cool. They might not admit they're wrong. A lot of they might not admit, you know, they might be stubborn.
I think that's right. I think sometimes people just don't know where to start, and that's overwhelming, and it's scary, and it makes you not want to even think about it. And I think that's right. Sometimes it's just about asking, like, what do I do, or what is this thing, or how do I get started?
Yeah, I mean, people that